Thanks, Joe. Hi, yeah, I'm Robert. I guess I got the name of my own talk wrong. It's You Can Have Gays, whatever. Anyway, I came all the way from New York City, flew in yesterday. That was fun. I didn't know Vancouver was so far, but I guess it is. Thanks for having me here. It's really great. It's really great that there's like a whole social justice institute here. I don't think NYU has one, so that would be a nice thing to try to emulate. So this is about gay sex in games, this talk. First, a content warning. There's going to be nudity and there's going to be sex stuff, and it's not good. I tried to keep it not too hardcore or anything, but it's hard to talk about images without actually showing the images and representations. So if you ever feel uncomfortable, you don't feel like staying, feel free to leave. I won't be offended or anything. It's fine. Do whatever you got to do. And then another warning, I don't know that much theory. I'm a little intimidated by being here. I haven't really done the reading. I just all the theory I get is just filtered through think pieces on the internet. And then that's how I try to stay up to date with stuff. So bear with me if I get stuff wrong or something. And feel free to let me know and tell me what I got wrong after the talk. Okay, first I want to start with a brief history of sex in games. One of the earliest sex games is called Custer's Revenge for the Atari 2600. In Custer's Revenge, you are that terrible man known as General Custer, and you are having your revenge, apparently, by having sex with native women in this game. And it's kind of implied that it's weird, assault or something. I don't know, this is just a really bad game, but this is really important to remember and note because this is kind of the seed of sexuality in mainstream games, right? This is one of the first games about sexuality, and you can kind of see this kind of culture or tone or attitude towards sex reflected for all video games to come. It kind of poisoned the well early on, which is really great. Another game called Night Trap. Night Trap was kind of like this teen horror movie FMV full motion video game where we had CD-ROMs for the first time, so we could put videos on stuff. So this game was kind of about teenagers having a slumber party, and then these serial killers are in the house and you have to protect them or something. It's kind of a strange game as well, also kind of a weird problematic attitude and relationship to sexuality. And Tomb Raider is also a very important landmark in this. Tomb Raider is maybe the first sexualized 3D polygon model that a lot of gamers and consumers were told that they should thirst for and stuff. And here you can see her body is emphasized in very specific ways that I'm sure we're all familiar with as also problematic and has its own issues and baggage. Then we kind of move on to Second Life. Well, for academics, I'm assuming we know what Second Life is. Second Life was, a massively multiplayer kind of world where you could create your own continents and stuff. So right here you can see the gay party continent or something. I'm also told there's a lesbian continent where men are ejected on sight, which sounds amazing. So there's all these different worlds and continents in Second Life, or at least in its heyday there were. And there was a lot of different sexualities. It was one of the main mediums for cyber sex after chat rooms and MUDs and stuff like that. And here you kind of see the origin of kind of what we might call user-generated sexuality and representation, right? Earlier Tomb Raider, Night Trap, Custer's Revenge, those were all made by game developers with specific agendas and arguments about stuff. But here, Second Life wasn't designed at first to accommodate sex, right? Sex was actually kind of invented. Cyber sex was invented in Second Life by players and users. And then we kind of extend that more to something called Garry's mod. Garry's mod was like a 3D character. It was like built on top of another game where you could pose the characters from that game. And people start importing more and more characters. So much that if you watch any like 3D generated like porn or something on the internet, it was probably made using Garry's mod or Source Filmmaker. These used to be video game engines, and now they're repurposed as like virtual porn studios a little bit. So Garry's mod very responsible for a lot of digital porn on the internet now. And we also see again players and users repurposing like the existing machinery of video games to kind of make something else that kind of describes their own sexuality. I mean, this is kind of more played for like laughs and strangeness, but you get the idea. And then we kind of come to this today, this moment in 2016, where now there's just so much fan culture and so much player base, like, and it's all consolidated, that it's actually this own cultural force that can overwrite the developer's original kind of ideas and attitudes. So there's a game called Overwatch. It's kind of this fun but like nonsense game about robots and people like shooting lasers at each other. But what's to know about Overwatch is that it's one of the gayest video games currently out. The developer, right, it's a bunch of straight dudes in Southern California who made this game, and they were focusing on, oh, do the guns feel good? Does it feel good to like jump and run on these walls? But then when Tumblr got a hold of Overwatch, they made Overwatch into something very different. They pretty much made there's like 30 characters in this game, and according to Tumblr, all of them are gay now. So here you see a very popular pairing between a character named Zarya and a character named May. What's cool about it is that it's like they're like very compatible in terms of like different like body types, right? Zarya is very like kind of butch and muscly, and May is kind of more like smaller and shorter. But then they kind of like complement each other as like a really beautiful couple. And they also complement themselves in the game. When I play as Zarya, I love it when another character is May, because we actually our gameplay affordances and strategies feed into each other really, really well. So here you see fan culture isn't just this kind of about the image and representation character design. It's actually engaging with the actual material of the gameplay itself and actually making arguments about the gameplay as well. So that kind of leads me into this kind of strange matrix that I spent way too long on. If we chart like two axes, this is going to be a very scientific chart, by the way. When we go from implicit representations of sexuality that are kind of more like under the surface or have to be brought out by fans and player communities, or explicit where it's kind of clear from the start that it's very much about a sexualized representation, versus gay or boring is the other axis that I've defined here. And we can chart a lot of different games on this really handy-dandy chart. So here we see something like Pokemon. Obviously, since an idea of what gay is very different from culture to culture, right? Pokemon does not read nearly as gay in a Japanese culture, right? And an idea of like a monolithic gayness around the world is like a myth, right? Because we all have very different ideas of our identities and perform those differently. But from a Western kind of biased perspective, Pokemon seems kind of really gay. It's actually very progressive. If you play Pokemon Go, there is no gender. You choose your style, rather, and your expression. It does not say pick male, pick female, right? It says, oh, do you want this style or do you want this style? And then you can read into those however you want. And then we can chart a lot of other games along this axis. And what I want you to notice is that, first, I think there's like a lot of upward momentum a little bit. These are mostly older games, and then up here in the upper left is kind of more like newer, recent games that Tumblr has finally made appropriate for its own use. And then the other thing I'd like you to notice about this very scientific chart is that these three question marks up here. Historically, in video games, we've had very few games that are both gay and explicit. So that's kind of something we want to kind of fix, and that's something I want to kind of change as a designer, and a lot of other people want to change. So I want to talk about that a bit now. I want to talk about a lot of the recent sex games that have come up in the last few years. One game is called Realistic Kissing Simulator. It's fantastic. It's about two characters kissing, but how do you define kissing, right? You could control this really amazing like tentacle-like tongue. And with the tongue, you can actually be very tender, or you can actually be kind of very like not tender, I guess, right? You can use your tongue to like slowly caress their nose in a very nice way, or you can use the tongue to poke them in the eye, and then they're like, ow, you're jabbing your tongue into my eye. So it's a kind of game about like tenderness. Notice that they're not explicitly like super gendered or something. It's kind of a queering of what sex is. It's also very progressive. In the beginning of the game, both players have to agree to kiss. And if one player says, no, I don't feel like kissing, then the game is like, okay, good job, you win, the end. Like it's totally okay if you don't want to kiss. Another game I want to talk about is Triad. Triad is a game about 3 women who had a lot of amazing sex, but now they're tired and now they have to go to sleep. So Triad is a game about trying to fit all these women's bodies on this bed that they share as a unit. And it's kind of a classic puzzle game, but it's also, what I really like about this interface is that as you move the pieces around, they can bump into each other. Which isn't a typical puzzle game tile, puzzle game behavior. So you actually have to be tender with how you move their bodies around and rearrange them on the bed. It's actually really, really nice that way. There's another game called Striptease. Striptease is a game that isn't necessarily queer in the sense that it's like a queer depiction of sexuality, but it's a criticism of heteronormative straight male gaze. In Striptease, you're in a strip club, and it's actually riffing off a genre common in a lot of like bars and strip clubs, a video game where you're trying to match 2 pictures, and when you match the configuration of one picture to the other one, it removes an article of clothing in the other one, and in that way, you undress the figure in the game. What's interesting about Striptease, I think, is that it purposely fragments a woman's body into all these different parts, and that's just the typical like puzzle game behavior. But it also actually kind of reflects, I think, how the male gaze kind of deconstructs a lot of bodies in this way too, and then actually criticizes it and talks about how it enables violence against women as well. So this is kind of an intense, serious game as a content warning, but I think it's really worth playing and talking about. Coming out on top is another game where it's pretty gay and explicit. This is the tamest image I could find of coming out on top, where there's a secret strategy or route where you have your pet goldfish, and eventually you have a really hot fever dream where you get to have sex with your goldfish. But the rest of Coming Out on Top is also about dating a diverse set of gay men, all of different like cultures and backgrounds, and kind of learning about their stories, and then having like really hot explicit sex with them. So Coming Out on Top is really great because I like how it's just putting it there up front. And then the most recent game I want to talk about is Lady Killer in a Bind. Lady Killer in a Bind is just, it's really hard to explain. Let me try to explain it. It's like you are the twin sister of a twin brother who's like the president of like a high school. So then he sends you onto a high school cruise ship, cross-dressing as him, pretending to be him with all these other women on the cruise ship. But then all the other women know that you're not actually your brother. So it involves this really weird, like so good it's bad, campy feel to it, where women kind of take turns dominating and submitting to each other. And it's also like really detailed narrative design. And I'll come back to this example in a bit. But if we take all of those games I just talked about and put them up there, I didn't talk about Seppi's Cum Shot, but you should definitely Google Seppi's Cum Shot. Not on a work computer, but like, you know, somewhere else. Great game. We can see that it fills in a lot of that missing territory we wanted to explore from before, right? Whereas before it was kind of covering the lower other three quadrants. Now we're actually kind of exploring this top right territory and filling it in, which is nice. So to sum up, I think a lot of people recognized that this was missing in the games community and games culture. So we kind of purposely sought to try to fill in that space and reflect those kinds of experiences that were missing from most games. But we still want to make more, right? Still not gay enough. So pivoting from that, I want to talk briefly about how I kind of formally think about games and try to interpret games. And I want to propose like a model of how to understand and interpret games and games culture. I think one big problem with how a lot of people think about video games is that they think about it as just a game designer or game developer crafting something on your phone or for your computer or something you download on Steam or even like a board game or something, and then players like consume it, right? If you're familiar with maybe like Paulo Freire with like a banking model of education, there's like a banking model of game design a little bit. It's the idea that we as auteurs make this thing and then players and customers like consume it and all that stuff. But I think that's wrong. And to talk about that, I want to talk through Lady Killer in a Bind as an example of a different way of thinking about games. With Lady Killer in a Bind, we can try to start charting all these different stakeholders and all these different parties that affect and influence what Lady Killer in a Bind means to us. So the developer of Lady Killer in a Bind, Christine Love, she is actually a responsible small business owner who employs a fair amount of people and contractors in Toronto. But her kind of brand online, if you follow her, you should follow her Twitter, by the way, Christine Love. She's just shamelessly horny all the time and just talking about, just posting amazing imagery all the time. And I think a lot of the art of video games now comes from the interplay and the distance between how a developer might be one way and how everyone might see them a different way. And we know that the shamelessly horniness is like a part of her performance as the developer, as the designer. And we can enjoy that and kind of take that into account for interpreting her games. Another thing I want to talk about is the players who play this game. This game actually has a lot of text. There's like, I think, 1 million lines of text. You have to read so much text, and it's really like hot and erotic and funny and flirty, so it is fun to read. But it also kind of, it's hard to play this game because you have to read a lot. You have to be a power reader. You have to be very fluent, also in the language of visual novels and the culture and background and history of them. And you also have to be strategic because there's all these different possible branching paths you can take in this game. So it's actually a very kind of hardcore game in a certain sense. But for the implied player, it's you're shamelessly horny for playing this game. You want to be dominated all the time. You want to be submitted to all the time, right? It's about kind of exploring your own sense of eroticism. And then lastly, I think one party that's often excluded from most ideas of how video games work is the audience. I view the audience as separate from a player, and that the audience doesn't have to play the video game. They just hear about it or talk about it on Tumblr or listen to it or whatever, or watch it on YouTube, right? So much of what we do with game culture does not involve playing video games anymore. So much of what we do with video game culture involves just witnessing it and talking about it and remediating and transforming it. So with Lady Killer in a Bind, the audience is shamelessly horny, but they're also implied to be shamelessly horny. And then lastly, the last stakeholder we can talk about in video games is capitalism. Every video game is kind of, its value and its meaning is always strained through the fact that we have to sell games in a market. And you have to make a living somehow, and you have to be sustainable somehow. So with Lady Killer Bind, it was $30 which is considered fairly high in video game culture. If she sold it for much higher, like $50, she might be getting death threats. That's how weird and toxic video game culture gets sometimes. And then if she sold it for $10, it might be, maybe people would like her better, but she would also not be able to make as much of a living off of her own artistic output, right? So it's a very strange balancing act. And also, it's a very high production value. All the images are very crisp and high resolution, right? That's what gamers care about. They care about the frame rate of something. And if your game does not run at 60 frames per second, you will get death threats and hate mail, which is, again, just a really weird feature of game culture, I guess. But it's something we always have to deal with as designers and developers. And then the last big thing I want to focus on with Lady Killer in a Bind is that it was actually barred from a storefront called Steam, which is like the biggest PC games app store ever. For most people, if you don't get on Steam, that's a death sentence. That means you cannot make a living off selling your games. Christine Love is just really special in that she was able to survive that and overcome that and sell it without being on Steam and still make enough money to live and make ends meet. But for anyone else, I think it would have been really, really bad and the story would have been very different. But this is constantly in the back of my mind when I make my own games. How will gamer culture, especially consumer culture strained through video games, interpret my game? Am I selling it for too high? Will I get death threats if I sell my games for money? That's something I actually have to think about. So to sum up this section, I'm trying to argue that witnessing a game is more important than playing a game. There are so many games out there, you will not have time to play the vast majority of them, right? We hear about most games through discussion and word of mouth and through video and so on. If you have like a media studies or theory background, this is probably very obvious to you. But in video games, this is a very radical notion. The idea that playing a game is not that necessary to understanding it or witnessing it or enjoying it. And in more general terms, I would just say talking about a game changes what it actually is, which again, I think is a relatively radical notion in games culture. So with a lot of that set up, with the context of where I came from making a lot of these sex games, and how I view how games work, I want to talk about my own work and how I think they function. One of the first games I made about a year or two ago was called Hurt Me Plenty. Hurt Me Plenty is a game about spanking a virtual guy right here. And before you can spank him, you actually have to do, there's 3 phases to this game. You have to do, the first phase is negotiation, where he actually talks about what his wants and desires are. You negotiate that. So he might say, oh, I feel like getting spanked very lightly today, not too much. And you can agree or try to negotiate with him about that. But if you do agree that he should only be spanked very lightly, it's up to you when you actually perform the scene in the second phase of this game that you actually keep your word and you keep that negotiation, keep that consent, where you don't spank him too hard. And if you spank him too hard and he invokes his safe word and you ignore his safe word and just keep spanking him, in the third phase of the game, which is aftercare, he talks about his feelings and he talks about, why did you do that? Why did you like lie to me and stuff? And as a result, the game will refuse to play with you in the future. So that goes up to maybe 3 or 4 weeks in real life where the game will refuse to play with you for a while. And I get a lot of complaints about this, but I think that's actually a very light penalty. In real life, they would refuse to talk to you ever again, or they would call the cops on you or something, right? Like 3 or 4 weeks is a very light penalty, I think. And a lot of what inspired this is I was really interested in how BDSM and kink cultures formalize sex in the negotiation, playing out a scene in aftercare. And I'd never really seen that before in a video game. If you play a lot of video games, the sex is usually like Do you want sex? Okay, you have 100 points. So now you can have sex. Oh, fade to black, over, right? So I actually was interested in performing sex and exploring a structure and shape of sex in interactive design. This is another game I did, Succulent. Succulent is a game that's pretty straightforward. You just help this man eat a popsicle for 3 minutes, and then it's over. And the game pretty much just kind of looks like this the whole time. And Succulent, it's very on purpose that the model you see before you is a very like masculine, beardy white guy. And the guys behind him are white masculine white guys. I wanted to have literally like clones, copies of him, and to personify him as a type that I think is venerated in gay culture, I would say. And that makes me feel strange as a kind of schlubby Asian guy who does not fit this body image and does not fit this body type. And often makes you wonder, like, oh, do I fit in this culture or not? So making this game was kind of my way of trying to parse my relationship with this kind of imagery and how central it is to gay male experience for some reason today. And to help parse that, I was kind of interested in this genre called homo hop. I mean, gay people do not call this homo hop, right? Straight people called it homo hop. To gay people, it was just like hip hop and stuff. But homo hop, as branded by media critics, was a genre of rap and hip hop primarily by gay men that explores very sexualized imagery of those gay men. Like a male, directing the male gaze on gay men. So here I have some screenshots of, on the left, that's a shop called Ice Cream Shop by Caswell. And then right here is Leaf. Leaf is a fantastic artist, by the way, if you haven't heard of Leaf. And you can see that a lot of the composition in here is very flat, right? The background is usually just a very solid color because it just wants to put the bodies front and center. And that's kind of in like implicit declaration of pride a little bit, right? It's not trying to hide it in a busy composition or framing. It's just putting, hey, this is a naked, hot gay dude right here. Look at it. So you can kind of see a lot of that influence in how I tried to construct my imagery in this game, right? I was heavily inspired by that. And then there's another game I made called Stick Shift. Stick Shift is a game where you have sex with your gay car. Stick Shift is a game where you're gradually trying to shift your gears from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 as a sort of like play on manual transmissions. And to rev up your car and excite your car, you kind of do this very obvious motion that I hopefully don't have to explain too much. And then when you do that, that revs up the RPMs on your car's dashboard. And when the RPMs are high enough, then you can shift to the next gear, which is kind of almost how cars work, but not really. Fun fact, I have never actually driven like fluently a manual transmission car. It's always just been an exercise in embarrassment and stalling and strangeness. So I wanted to relate that embarrassment with sex. And actually, when I had no idea how, like, oh, is this like similar enough to, will people get it? And when I asked around my office, like 20 men materialized around me and gave me their opinions. So that was great. That was very helpful. And Stick Shift was actually started from, someone actually tweeted to me, like, you should make your next game riffing off Blowjob, a film, 20-minute film by Andy Warhol. And Blowjob is a film where you just see this guy from kind of the shoulders up for 20 minutes, and the camera does not look down or change. But it's called Blowjob. And as you watch him, he kind of makes these faces and shifts around and directs his gaze in different ways. And you kind of read into what's happening based on the context, right? It's called Blowjob, so presumably he's being orally serviced below the camera frame. But what's interesting is that it's all implied, right? It's all kind of implicit. So that kind of led for me to separate the image, the screen, game screen, into 2 frames. On the left, you see kind of a shoulders up view of the driver. And then on the right, you see the car's perspective as well. And what I aim to do is it's really hard to depict a car getting horny or getting excited. So that's why actually the human face is really important. The human face is almost kind of like the face of the car itself. And I think that kind of speaks to our relationship with cars. I kind of miss driving a little. I miss being able to drive and knowing if I can fit into a parking space and then just fitting in that parking space really well, right? When you drive and you feel fluent at the wheel, you suddenly have this car sense. You like meld into your car and then you can just kind of drive without really consciously thinking about it, right? And I kind of missed that a little bit, and I wanted to relate that to how bodies can interface, whether they're human or human mechanical. And then this is the fourth game I made. It's called Cobra Club. Cobra Club is a dick pic photo studio game. And in Cobra Club, it kind of riffs off this genre of video games where you create 3D characters and you can adjust all the features and customize your avatar in the video game, right? So here, I wanted to apply that same logic to dicks because I feel like that hasn't been done before. So here you can see one slider controls like your ball size, your ball bias. One enables a piercing. There's a checkbox for a foreskin, but I had to remove that because people complained about how the foreskin looked, that's not what a foreskin looks like. So I had to remove that because they were upset. But there's also like a pube slider right there. And then below there, you actually also see a variety of skin tones. I was very conscious of what the average value of a slider meant and implied about what body images and what a normal dick is supposed to be, right? That also relates to my treatment of race in this game. The different skin tones are all randomized. Each playthrough, sometimes you'll have that very tan beige skin tone at the top, but sometimes you'll have a very darker color skin tone at the top. And it was a lot of me trying to explore the politics of a user interface like that and what it implies about what a normal is or what a first option is and so on. So that was a very important part of this project. The other important part of this project was a really great website called critiquemydickpic.tumblr.com. Critiquemydickpic.tumblr.com is a website where anyone can submit a dick pic. They are inclusive of all body types. They're trans inclusive as well. If you don't have a biological dick, you can also use strap-on as well, and that will be treated exactly the same as any other dick pic. And what's really nice about Critique My Dick Pic is it reimagines what a dick pic can do and what the work a dick pic can do. Instead of a tool of harassment used to like silence women and intimidate people, what if a dick pic was more about just people learning to love their own bodies, kind of, right? Like thinking, oh yeah, my dick looks good. I'm gonna take a selfie of my dick and send it to all my friends, and then they'll totally be affirming and tell me, yeah, your dick is amazing today, or like, oh no, that dick was not on point today, right? So, right, and then the author, she's very honest and actually very like considerate with her criticism. She will never say, oh, your dick is too small or your dick looks weird. She will say, the lighting was not very good in this picture. I wish you just reconsidered the lighting, or reconsider your hand posing. She's very much about hands. So it's very much about treating dick pics as this kind of like formal art medium and art culture on itself. And I really liked that idea that when you make dick pics, it's for yourself. It's life affirming and body affirming. So in this game, when you take a dick pic, you can send it to other AI NPC bots in the game, and then they will give you feedback, and they will say, that's awesome, or actually they're always positive, because I didn't want to write AI to actually think about it. But they will also send you dick pics as well, but only if you consent, because dick pics are great if everyone wants to send them and receive them. Then dick pics are perfectly amazing. So I wanted to imagine like a dick pic utopia. You know, what if dick pics were like a force for democracy and a beautiful society? You know, how would that work, this game tries to imagine that. And then my last public release was a game called Rinse and Repeat. Rinse and Repeat is the most advanced male shower simulator game ever made. Rinse and Repeat is a game where you wash a guy, your friend, at the shower at your gym. And he'll kind of communicate his needs to you. He'll be like, oh, can you get my back? Oh, can you get my arm or whatever? And then you scrub him in that part. If you scrub him too hard, he'll be like, ow, that's too much, like lay off. But if you scrub him too softly and go very slowly with your mouse, he might be like, oh, I can't feel it. Come on, you can do better than that. So you're actually having to listen to his needs a lot and trying to be kind of tender, but also kind of like firm with him. You're trying to zero in on what he likes to feel and how he likes to be touched. So it's kind of a tender game that way, I think. What's the big formal constraint of this game, though, is that to play this game, you have to play at the right time in real life when his Zumba class comes out. So at like 6 p.m. on a Thursday, that's when he's finished with his Zumba class. That's when you have to go and start up the game on your computer. And if you do not start your game around that time, you've missed your slot, and you have to wait until Friday at 4 a.m. maybe. And then at Friday at 4 a.m., then you can try to play and hopefully meet him. So this was a game where a lot of people were asking me for a game where the player is submissive instead of dominant. So this is my interpretation of trying to make a game where the player conforms to the video game's needs, instead of the video game always being endlessly available for a player. And in that way, I feel like the game is kind of a dominant, making demands of the player and making requests and stuff. And a lot of the politics of this one are informed by a genre of gay porn known as locker room porn. And locker room porn kind of represents a very real anxiety, I think, that a lot of gay men have, that they're kind of vulnerable in this very like macho, masculine space. And it's kind of dangerous and scary. So a lot of locker room porn is kind of actually imagining, what if gay men weren't scared of locker rooms? Or what if we were perfectly at ease and safe? So it's this like super perfect utopia and stuff. But like in actuality, like even in gay gyms, there's not much locker room sex, if ever. This is still very much like a fantasy, right? But I also want to explore the consequences of that fantasy in my game. So after you play with that hunky guy and wash him enough times, he says, okay, well, this relationship's kind of getting too much. And then he leaves, and then you can never scrub him ever again. Because he gets spooked out by the commitment required of him now. So in my games, I want to explore kind of sex as its own kind of medium. I want to explore more than just like depictions and imagery of sex. I also want to talk about the culture of sex. I want to engage the history of all these different like situations and fantasies and framings. I also want to explore the politics of all this stuff. So for example, in this shower game, you are a black person. And I think a lot of players actually don't really notice this. You're a black person literally washing the back of a white guy who will never wash your back, like, and reciprocate, right? And I think that relates to a lot of the politics, I feel, in gay male communities. And my games try to explore that. Not super like preachy, like in your face or whatever, but kind of more subtextual, that's there if you choose to read into it and engage with it. I'm also really interested in uncanny depictions of bodies. Almost all the bodies in my games are kind of strange feeling a little bit. And part of that is because of this thing, I'm sure you're familiar with, the Uncanny Valley, right? The idea that as a human depiction, especially in 3D CGI, looks more and more realistic. It looks more like a scary zombie ghost thing that lacks a soul or a spark, and then it's actually really creepy. This is a very important idea in robotics. But in video games, I kind of feel like the the mainstream industry always wants to try to get past the Uncanny Valley a little bit. My games try to dive to the bottom of the Uncanny Valley and find all the beautiful treasure at the bottom of the Uncanny Valley. So I really like it when my game seems to malfunction or break, because I think this kind of represents a very real human relationship with bodies, right? You might feel weird in your body sometimes. Your body might do strange stuff you don't understand. That's okay, right? That's just part of what a body does. This is maybe more realistic than a perfectly representational human being, right? And then the other thing my games try to engage with is like capitalism, this notion of production value that determines a lot of what a good game in video game culture is. So suffice to say, my games have good graphics. When a gamer sees this, they think, oh yeah, this looks like Grand Theft Auto 5. This looks like 1,000 people worked on this for years, and then I can buy this for $60. It has very high detail 3D models. This model I actually paid for with NEA US government grants. So I literally use US government money to create more gay pornography in the world. So I'm kind of proud of that. But also notice that I also add a lot of hair cards a little bit to give it some bushiness. Drops actually slither down the popsicle and stuff. This is a very detailed, high fidelity, high resolution image. And that's a very crucial part, for better or worse, of how gamers read video games. So finally, let's try to put this all together and kind of synthesize this into an actual argument about something. So first I start by talking about how there were no gay explicit games, I felt like, in that space, that upper right quadrant of that graph. And I feel like when we miss that whole section of experience, that's erasure of that experience, basically. So I want to make sure that experience is represented within the culture. So a lot of us noticed that, so then we started making gay explicit games. And actually a lot of the games I showed you in that second part of the presentation, a lot of them were made by trans women. Trans women basically built the sex game genre, and then they were kind of forced out due to capitalism and stuff and lack of sustainability in the end, which kind of sucks. But I do want to acknowledge their contributions because they were a very important part to thinking about how to make a sex game. And sex games always have to involve consent and all these other attitudes about sex, right? Then, from there, I talked about how I view games. I view games as a complex network of meaning being created and transformed between developers, players, audiences, and capitalism. And these together, these all congeal and churn in a whirlpool or something and turn games into this pure platonic form of culture where we don't even really have to play video games anymore to engage with them. Instead, you just have to know enough to pretend you've played a video game. And that's most of my conversations with my colleagues. Then, lastly, I kind of wondered with my games, what if I made gay explicit games but kind of messed with this relationship? What if I tried to reconfigure it? And is that where the art of a video game comes out of? Not just in the visual image, but also in our performance of it, in our relationship to it as a commodity or a product. So I tried to do that. So ideally, imagine this weird platonic normal gamer who looks at my game for the first time. And first they think, oh, those are good game graphics. Oh, wow, that's a really detailed 3D model. Oh my God, that's 1 million polygons. Can my computer even run that? Oh my God. And then you say, wait, this is gay. That guy is doing really gay stuff with his mouth. Then they say, wait, but if it has good graphics and it's expensive, that means it's worth this investment. That means it's worth investing in this gay demographic or gay market. Or actually a lot of women play my games as well. So that means it's worth investing for women in video games. But how can a video game ignore the needs of a straight man? So then the last result is this can't be a video game because it doesn't acknowledge this all-important demographic. Which is very silly because if you look at this image, this is a video game image, right? This is a 3D model, digital representation, interactive with your mouse and stuff. It's a video game. You can't say it's not a video game. To everyone, it's obvious it is a video game. So, to sum up, having gay sex and eating it too means kind of playing with this kind of hardwired idea of how gamers reason about games and decide which games are important or valuable or meaningful to them, right? I wanted to make gamers admit that gay sex has good graphics, that it looks good and it's interesting and it's worth money and stuff. So briefly, I'll walk through a lot of this analysis with my own game, Radiator 2. Radiator 2 was a compilation of the first 3 games I talked about. So as a developer, I start as a former industry protege. I was going to enter the game industry and make more like zombie shooting games. But then I kind of turned to the dark side and went to art school in New York instead. And now I'm like one of the evil emperors, I guess. But the implied developer is, oh, was this made by 7 people? I actually get comments and reviews like, yo, the team that worked on this is really weird and messed up. And then I'm like, no, actually I'm just one guy in Brooklyn, right? So part of it is messing with gamer expectations and assumptions about the medium. Lastly, next, the players who play my game. Ideally, no one plays my game. I don't want to deal with players playing my game because then they complain and whine about stuff. Oh, it won't work on my computer. Oh. So then ideally, no one plays my games ever. But the implied players here are maybe women, gay men. My games are very popular with moms. When I showed this game in London, I was told there were a lot of moms who would shoo their children away and then play with my dick pic game and hog the machine for like 20 minutes and stuff. So, what if we made games that acknowledged the needs of moms? Audience. My audience is basically everyone on YouTube. Every YouTuber sees my game and then their eyes go cha-ching, cha-ching. I can just record myself playing this video game and I will get 1 million views because it looks weird and has good graphics. And that means I'll get a bunch of money in ad revenue, right? So everyone on YouTube, my games get a lot of play on YouTube. They're probably my dominant audience. They're probably the most dominant way that people consume and see my games on YouTube. Literally millions and millions and millions of views, more than actual players. But the implied audience, the reaction to this was in the end kind of a mixed bag here. Some YouTubers were kind of in on it, I felt like, and we were laughing with these depictions of gay politics and gay bodies and how we think sex works and stuff, right? But some YouTubers ended up kind of weaponizing it for their weird casual homophobia, and they ended up using these games to kind of say, oh, see, isn't gay sex weird and gross and strange and disgusting, right? So actually some YouTubers ended up using my games in that way, and that kind of makes me feel really bad. But in the end, I think I have to make peace with that a little bit because the player is also responsible for creating the meaning of the game. And if I accept that premise, that means I have to accept the fact that people will use my games for this purpose. And then capitalism, again. The relationship to capitalism, it looks very expensive, but it's free. If I charged money for this, I would get death threats. Unreliable platform partners, I cannot put this on the App Store. The App Store will never let me. Google Play will not let me. So I'm closed out of like every phone and device ever. I'm able to put this on Steam, but I'm treading on very thin ground with them. It's very hard to know what they will accept and what they won't accept. And it's very hard to actually honestly communicate with them a little bit. I'm okay with moderation. I'm okay with being put behind an age gate. But with Steam, or other like big monolithic institutions, they never really tell you what they think is, oh no, that's too much nipple, or like, oh no, that butt needs to be 10% more covered, right? If they actually set boundaries, I would be okay with following them, but they don't never set boundaries, which makes an honest conversation with them really difficult as an art maker trying to work in sex. And lastly, I was banned from Twitch.tv. This game, and actually most of my games, are banned from the most popular video game streaming service in the world, which is really fun in the short term, right? It's fun to say you were banned, It's fun to feel like you're dangerous and like, yeah, you should be afraid of me. You should ban me. But in the long term, because I rely so much on video game culture, talking and remixing and thinking about my work, being banned from the biggest video service really, really hurts me. And it's really, really bad. And I'm constantly trying to advocate for them to consider a more considerate moderation policy. It's impossible to talk with Twitch.tv either. They don't even tell you when they ban you. You just get secretly banned one day, and then someone's like, oh, hey, by the way, Robert, did you see that you were banned? And I'm like, oh, great, again. So I'm one of the most banned game developers in the world probably right now. And that's kind of a bummer note to end on, but it's a mixed bag, right? On one hand, I feel like I've achieved a lot of my aims. I've gotten a lot of like exposure and cultural influence within games culture. But on the other hand, I've also encountered a lot of institutional barriers to how I can access my audience and talk to them. So it's a mixed bag, like everything in life is, but that's okay. That's where I'm at now. Thanks for listening. And I have 2 extra bonus slides for you. So one, if you're kind of new to a lot of this games culture stuff that I've been talking about, here's some recommended reading for you. Rise of the Video Game Zinesters is by Anna Anthropy. She's a video game designer who writes about, what's a punk aesthetic for video games and who is working in that aesthetic. Her book is a really great introduction and primer to a lot of that methodology. Second, Video Games for Humans is by Merritt Kopus. It's an anthology of playthroughs of what are called twines. Twines are kind of these textual, interactive hypertext stories that kind of had a resurgence in the last few years, especially with queer artists and people of color. So they made a lot of these stories, and this book is actually a transcript of someone playing a twine and then having their own commentary with it. So it's actually a very interesting way of thinking about interactive mediums, and twine and text stories are uniquely situated for that in a book. And then lastly, the other thing I want to recommend are these 2, this is a blog post, and this is actually a twine game, actually. This is by Matthew Burns. He's a former AAA video game industry writer person, and a lot of his work is about critiquing the capitalist shape of the video game industry. Why are video games all about shooting people as like a white, butch, masculine man, right? What does that mean? Well, writer will do something, talks about the groupthink that happens in the video game industry and why that often leads into very conservative artistic choices. So these are all pretty good readings. I think that kind of informed a lot of my approach to games. And then lastly, you should go to a video game party tonight at Heart Projector. Heart Projector is your local Vancouver alternative games collective, and they host pop-up parties. And I helped curate the one actually tonight. It's at 1305 Powell. Just walk up. It's one night only, 8 to midnight, cash bar. And the games I chose are all games that I think remind me of kind of this idea of drifting, like situationalism, you know. They're all about abstract spaces and our relationship to space. And if you're a gamer, you probably haven't heard of most of these games, so you should go and check them out. And if you're not a gamer at all, it's fine. All these games were chosen because they were very accessible. And very much not requiring a lot of video game culture like know-how, but they're about engaging with the virtual depiction of the space, which I think anyone can do. So that's the note I guess I want to end on. Help support your local communities and help sustain us, and then we'll destroy capitalism. Thanks.
So do we have any questions from the audience for Robert Yang?
Yeah, thanks first off for the talk. It was really great and got a lot of cool things. I'm curious if you like kind of always felt like the current brand that you have is something that you were aware of, or like, oh yeah, this is me, this is what I'm going forward with. That's something that you've
No, I basically. Oh, so the question was like a lot of my like methodology and approach and analysis. Was that like kind of what I wanted to do from the beginning?
Yeah.
Is that a question? And the answer is like no. I was kind of making it up as I went along a little bit. Because when you make a video game, you don't really know what it is. You're just like, I'm gonna put this thing and then this code and these like sounds here. Oh, that feels like this, right? It's you have to evaluate it in this very holistic mode, right? It's kind of like a brain. You can't look at an individual like neuron and know what a brain is, right? It's all those neurons working together as a whole. That's kind of what a video game is like, I would say. Yeah.
I was gonna say you are selling your games on Steam.
The only game I have on Steam is Radiator 2, which is free.
Okay. I was gonna ask, where else do you distribute your games? And like for people who can't distribute their games on Steam.
Oh, that's a very good question. Let's
Or where
ask
to go
Google
to
Chrome. When I don't really go on, I actually usually do a first round of releases on a web service called itch.io, which has kind of emerged as kind of the indie Bandcamp alternative to Steam, to the giant monolithic corporation Steam. And itch.io is very, very great. It's very artist friendly. Anyone can put a game on there, and if curators like it, it'll be featured on the front page, and you'll get discovered, and it'll be really great. You can also sell your games. You can sell your games for money and then get paid like pretty fast too. With Steam, you have to wait until a quarterly check, and they cut you a quarterly check. With itch.io, they can like send it into your PayPal pretty fast. So it's a very sustainable, much more artist-friendly way of making ends meet and stuff. And a lot of people do pretty well on itch, I think. It also has a lot of artist-friendly features, like you can do a reverse sale on itch, where you can make your game more expensive as like a cool kind of fun feature. Another feature is that when you put your stuff on itch, there's actually a slider where you decide the cut that itch.io receives from your game sale. So with Steam, it's a non-negotiable 30% at least that they get from every sale. Both itch.io, you can move the slider to 0% if you are barely making ends meet, or you can move the slider to like 15%, which is personally what I do, which I think is a reasonable cut for a distribution platform. So it's really nice and like a very progressive, it's a compassionate capitalism a little bit. Yeah.
Thanks. That was a really, really fabulous talk. Just a quick question. So on one hand, you were talking a lot about kind of your personal goals and your personal process of making or designing a game, and then on the other hand, are saying to be kind of this, what I guess it would be the players want or what the audience wants, and it often seems like sometimes they're kind of in conflict.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of negotiate those tensions? If you could just talk a bit more about that.
Okay, so I'll repeat for the camera. So I think the question was about, because I imagine games as an interplay between players and audiences and developers and stuff, and I talked about how I have my own goals and sometimes that conflicts with an audience's goals or a player's goals. How do I kind of deal with that and negotiate and not like lose it, I guess? And the question is, and the answer is, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. It's really like messy, especially with like the YouTube situation where I heavily rely on YouTube to have some kind of like cultural cachet. But on the other hand, I can't control how they frame my work. Some options that are not available to me. So some people have suggested, what if I just sent DMCA cease and desist to all the YouTubers I don't like because they're actually using my copyrighted content. And the answer I can't do that is, the reason why I can't do that is because I will be like destroyed by them. I actually feel like YouTubers actually maintain a lot of power over a lot of video game designers. They kind of just perform in our game, and then, which is fine. It's fine if you're good at performing in a video game and you manage to make a game more entertaining and more interesting than what it originally was, you earned your money. But when some YouTubers interact with my work and they make it more boring or more or like just unpleasant, right? then I feel like, no, why are you making money from this? You're ruining my game. You're telling all my jokes wrong. You're not understanding all the stuff going on. You're making it less interesting for the audience. Why should you get a cut of this? So it's a very mixed bag. And I'm still trying to negotiate that and figure all that stuff out. Yeah.
You talked about visual novels like Lady Killer and The Bind, which are text with illustrations, and then you talked about your own work. What do you feel are the strengths and weaknesses of those media compared to each other? 3D versus text. We're talking about sexuality and romance.
I think, well, I'm personally not a very good writer, so I think writing sexy stuff is really hard. So that's why I personally kind of stay away from it. I feel like I have more visual intuition as an artist, so that's kind of what I lean on more. But if you're talking in terms of like formal differences between like text and like visual stuff, I would say that I think what's nice about textual stuff is that the bar is higher, right? You have to be a much better writer to write really good erotic fiction. But on the other hand, you can rise so much higher than just a visual depiction, right? A visual depiction of a body is kind of set and concrete, and it's right there. But when I read like I felt her ropes suddenly dig into my skin with every breath I took, that communicates like sensation, right? And I can imagine that. So I feel like that's almost a much more visceral kind of response or capability. But I think the bar for craft is a very different kind of bar.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I really like how you use government money to make Succulent.
Oh, thank you.
Could you talk about your process with approaching like writing grants? Do you explicitly say, for example, you're going to be using models for a game that depicts sexuality, or do you obfuscate it more to be more like an exploration of mechanical metaphors?
Okay, so the question was for the camera, how do I approach getting grant money, and do I just tell the government, hey, I want to make gay porn, give me money, and do I do that? And the answer is I didn't do that. The way I got the grant money was actually dispersed through another nonprofit organization that actually did the work of writing the grant. I was actually one of 5 queer artists who got grant money to produce something. And I think that's the approach I would favor. I would try to partner up or collaborate with some organization that has experience writing grants and stuff. And I think, especially if you group up and like frame it as like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a 3-day conference where we engage with the public and have a show at the end, right? Like, I think the government really likes to hear stuff like that. So it's useful to partner up with people for this. Don't just go at it alone. And I think, actually, I was actually just talking to an NEA person a few weeks ago at a VR conference.
What's an NEA?
The National Endowment for the Arts.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I forget this is in America. I'm terrible. I'm a bad person, sorry. The NEA, so I don't know how the Canadian grant landscape is. I assume it's better because you're like smarter and have healthcare and stuff. But in the US at least, it's kind of this very like fraught process where there's a lot of competition for dwindling arts funding. But with the NEA, the government representative, the US government arts representative I talked to, she wanted to see more like arts and technology grants. They really do want to engage with more artists working with technology. And to them, writing a grant is easy for some reason. I don't know why they think that. They think that's not a high barrier, which is why I would suggest partnering up with someone who knows. I don't know what I'm doing, so it's great when someone else does.
Okay, we are running out of time. Let's give Robert Yang